Welcome back, AP. Oh, man. So we have got so much stuff to get into on this gorgeous day. It's going to be like 80 degrees outside. Absolutely beautiful. Let me put a timer on so I don't destroy your guys' brains or anything like that, right? So just a heads up, this is a really solid flip. We're going to be talking about like art, literature, and kind of the establishment of like, the Roaring 20s era, the consumer culture, like just kind of, right? Like getting into that entire, like the new image of women and things like that. And then we're going to get into like the political instability that was going on in Europe post-World War I, right? Now, and then we're going to do all that, and then we're going to get into World War II. And then we're going to get into World War II next week when we come back, all right? So, and then we're going to wrap up World War II, and we're going to kind of make a greatest hit since World War II flip, and then we're going to just use the rest of the time to review and get ready, all right? So, because your, whatchamacallit, AP test is coming up soon, and you're going to do fine, I promise, all right? So don't worry, don't freak out, okay? We will have the appropriate study guides made and ready to rock, but let's get into it, all right? So, picking up where we left off, we were talking about literature, right? We talked about how no longer is, literature going to be about the somber protagonist against the mean antagonist, blah, 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 blah. All right? Instead, it's going to journey into thoughts, feelings, motivations, memories, right? Like Marcel Proust in Remembrance of Things Past, and he sat in his apartment for 10 straight years and wrote down like childhood memories, right? So this is then going to bleed into a brand new technique, a Freudian era technique, if you understand what I'm saying. A very id, ego, superego kind of thing going on. The stream of consciousness technique. Originally, actually, this term was coined by a psychiatrist, but this stream of consciousness technique is going to be implemented by writers, in which there is a linear progression, a start and a finish, and it's all about the inner workings, thoughts, feelings, and play of the mind of the viewer, right? So you are not actually along for the ride as the third-party observer to the protagonist. You are now in his head, right? So this is using the internal monologue of a character to understand and explore their psyche. And can you pop around? Can you bounce around? Can you go to one of the other protagonists' like views? Can you go to anybody? Of course you can, right? Some of the biggest writers that actually use this, and I'm sure you've heard of this technique already in Mr. Buchanan, Mr. D'Antonio's class, which Mr. D thinks it's like lame. I think it's kind of cool. So famous writers include Virginia Woolf, right? I know he was like, So, and then we got another big one, James Joyce. James Joyce wrote a very famous book called Ulysses that utilizes this technique. Now, I have a firm belief that Anthony, Jules Baer, Shane Slack, a lot of y'all would actually really enjoy this book if you could find like a modern adaptation of it. All right, so Ulysses is a loosely paralleled story to Homer's The Odyssey, but it just documents a guy journeying through Dublin in a single day. Starts out at his friend's home at 8 a.m. in the morning, and then eventually ends up with his wife at the end of the entire thing, telling her the events of his day and requesting breakfast in bed, right? But the crazy things that happens, and he encounters the Cyclops, and he encounters all the other bad guys in Ulysses Odyssey. It's a very neat book. I read it in college, and I was actually just like floored, you know what I mean? But I was also in like my avant-garde phase. So another big one, William Faulkner. My wife's a big fan of William Faulkner. The Sound and the Fury is a very intense book. Actually, he's a Southern U.S. writer, all right? But The Sound and the Fury is actually written from the perspectives of several different characters. One of them actually happens to be mentally handicapped. So it's a very intense, very unique telling of this story and the use of the stream of consciousness technique. And then you're going to see another big jump up to anti-utopian novels, right? So for the longest time, working up to World War I, a lot of big European writers were talking about utopia, right? The utopia that waits us on the other side, right? Oswald Spengler, though, is going to be one of the big guys that comes around and is like, utopia ain't coming after that war, right? He writes a book called The Decline of the West, right? And then T.S. Eliot, right, very famous poet, writes The Wasteland, right? Discussing that the utopia that we seek is never going to happen, especially if we allow things like World War I to occur. So remember, like, when we were talking about the mask that Anna Coleman Ladd made. Why I said Caldwell Ladd, I'll never understand. I was driving to Easter. I was like, that's not her name. All right, so Anna Coleman Ladd made for those disfigured World War I soldiers. literature is going to become a big, big example of like that mass, that healing moment, right? And then, of course, Kafka, Franz Kafka, The Trial, The Castle, The Metamorphosis. The Metamorphosis is a crazy, almost Dada-esque book where a guy literally turns into an insect. It's a dystopian, alienated world where society crushes you without relent, and you cannot stop it. Now, his predictions were kind of materialized under the Nazi state in Germany because he himself was actually a German Jew, right? So, like, he actually predicted a lot of very, very disgusting onslaughts on their way, right? And then we're going to journey into a different thing. So that was literature, right? The big ones you got to remember are any of those people. If you connect more with James Joyce and the stream of consciousness technique, run with that one. If you like the idea of Faulkner a little bit better, run with that one, right? So, but modernism is then going to be coming around, right? Remember, screw the past. Let's leave it behind. Oh, God, nothing like World War I just changed us all forever, right? Modernism is the label given to the artistic and cultural movements of the 19th century, late 19th, early 20th century that has to do with a lot of different fun facts. Radical experimentation, challenging tradition, and extreme expression, right? Really putting it out there. You could say that modern art was born post-World War I, which a lot of modern art I think is garbage, but a lot of it's actually super solid too if you actually go see some good stuff. I'm a big, big fan of modern photography. I think Ansel Adams is like absolutely amazing. And I know Kieran right now is like, well, of course he says Ansel Adams. Well, hey, just because he's well known doesn't mean he's not good. All right. So now modernism is going to first show up in architecture, right? The things that we all see and interact with for free, face to face, all the time, right? The stuff that's not delineated by class because anyone can see a building, right? So in U.S., you've got the birth, in the United States, you've got the birth of skyscrapers, right? You've got the birth of the building up city, right? The city that doesn't have height restrictions, that doesn't have the European houseman design where we're not trying to like see past anything. So in the United States, modernism is going to give us birth to the modern city that we know and love today, the one that explodes from the middle and then radiates out, right? So because steel is cheap, concrete is cheap, and we got electric elevators now. So let's make these bad boys as tall as we possibly can. So then Louis H. Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright are early creditors to these designs, right? Open interiors, mass-produced building materials, right? So we're going to start off with buildings like this, right? Skyscrapers. The Flatiron Building, actually, in, I think that was 1917. Flatiron Building. Flatiron Building in New York is claimed to be the very first skyscraper. It's actually right here, all right? So that's the Flatiron Building, if you've ever seen that guy in New York before. There he is, all right? So one of the very first skyscrapers ever made, right? So the Flatiron Building is claimed to be like the first skyscraper. And then also, of course, you've got, yet again, going forward with modernism, you ain't just going to stop at skyscrapers, getting into your Eiffel Towers, the construction of cheap metal structures, right, that are going to be lasting forever, even though the Eiffel Tower is supposed to have been torn down, all right? So also, though, modernism in architecture, you've got functionalism. People believe that functionalism is a big thing when it comes to architecture. The principle that buildings should serve their best possible purpose, right? So what is this building meant to do? Let's make sure it does that, all right? So a house is a machine for living is a very famous quote from a very famous designer named Le Corbusier, all right? So a house is a machine for living. So the insides of it should be much like the gears, right? They should aid the person who lives within it. So beauty, according to these new modernist architects, is clean, straight lines, not decoration, all right? So even though, ironically enough, Art Deco comes back around in the late 1920s and everybody's like, oh, bring decoration back, all right? So now in the early 1920s, though, it was all about clean, straight lines, very, very like robotic in a sense, right? So the Bauhaus is actually going to be established in Germany, which is an interdisciplinary school of fine applied arts that brought together many leading architects, designers, and theatrical innovators. This, for example, is a modernist interior. Look at the lines. The clean, straight staircase that almost disappears into the wall, right? The easy radiator that gets pushed to the side. The open floor plan. Clean, straight, nothing flashy, right? That is functionalism. Functionalism. Really quick, just stare at this thing of functionalism, functionalism, functionalism. That is functionalism in modernist style architecture that's going to come around post-World War I. And this is the Bauhaus, where a lot of these ideas were actually fostered, nurtured, and grown, right? The Bauhaus became the center for modernist styles of art, architecture, interior design. A lot of the products that come out of the Bauhaus are things like this. This is a functional design set of tables, right? They can easily be shoved together and then stored away because they are supposed to be a machine for living, right? So here's another one. Very famous chair that came out of the Bauhaus. It's comfortable, it's clean, it's sleek, it's got straight lines, right? So this is one of the most famous things to come out of the Bauhaus. It's a coffee pot. Cheers. But it's minimalized, right? It's got minimal use of any object that it's not excessive, right? It's got a handle, it's got an opening, it's flat top, it doesn't need to be pretty. It's supposed to be functional, right? So those are very good examples of functionalism within interior design, and just to kind of give you an idea of what functionalism in modern architecture. Now, like I said, later on in the 1920s, Art Deco comes roaring back. This is what Art Deco looks like. Art Deco 1920s. So Art Deco comes flying back when Art Deco is Great Gatsby. When you think of the Great Gatsby, that's Art Deco, right? So Art Deco was when they decided to bring all that like fancy decoration back, and one of the most famous buildings that actually uses it is the Chrysler Building in New York, right? So boom, that's Art Deco, right? So it didn't, like, modernism and functionalism didn't last forever, but it's just really unique, and you kind of really need to study it when you're talking about the progression of history in Europe at this time, due to the fact that, like, again, people were so shocked by World War I. Let's challenge the assumed authority. Let's challenge everything we think we know about art, architecture, interior design. Let's get away from fancy handmade wooden things, and let's move towards clean, straight, very sterile kind of things, right? Let's banish everything from before the First World War, and let's bring about new ideas, right? So this is especially seen in artistic movements, and you know how I feel about art, so back up, all right? Now, first and foremost, let's get into the big styles, right? So you've got several different styles of art that pop up post-World War I. Some of you are like, how am I supposed to remember all this? You really just need to kind of remember that World War I served as the splitting ground between your like romantic art, right? Your realism in literature kind of stuff, your soft pastels and ideals of beauty, and moved into Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Secessionism, Dadaism, Cubism. It moved into bonkers kind of stuff by comparison. It doesn't have to be clean anymore. It can be as wild as you want it to be, or it doesn't have to be completely finessed and realistic. It can be anything you want it to be, right? And I particularly think this art movement is the best one that has hit Europe so far, right? So some of you are like, you said you like romantic art a lot. I change my mind all the time. Now, Impressionism is stuff that looks to the everyday for inspiration. Turns its back to battles, wealthy, and anything religious, right? So, turns its back on. It's supposed to be an it's right there. Turns its back on battles, wealthy, and the religious. Remember when we looked at the paintings of like Napoleon on his horse or crossing the Alps, right? That's romantic art, right? Romantic, big, battle, violent. Okay? Like when Tommy was like, oh, that's got to be Victor Emmanuel over there because he's wearing a military uniform. He looks super gallant. That's pre-World War I, right? But your big Impressionism ones are Monet, Degas, and Cassatt, all right? Now, we'll go over those guys here in a second, all right? Now, then you've got Post-Impressionists and Expressionists, which adds a deep psychological meaning to the Impressionism field, right? To the art itself as well, okay? The most famous one there, Vincent van Gogh, right? A lot of you know Van Gogh, cut off part of his ear for a woman that he loved, apparently. All right, now, Secessionists are heavily decorated images with expressive feelings. So you've got looks at every day for inspiration. Let's add some feelings in that noise. Now let's decorate them feelings. And then, of course, you got Cubism with Picasso, which is a complex geometry of zigzagging lines and angled overlapping planes, right? So let's look, starting with Impressionism. Let me get my ugly mug out of the way so you can see these beautiful works of art, right? Let me double check on my time, too. Oh, we're cruising. Doing well, all right? First of all, you have Claude Monet. Claude Monet is by far, I think, my favorite impressionist. And there is a gigantic collection of his works in Philadelphia at the Barnes Foundation. If you ever get a chance to go to the Barnes Foundation, get there now. All right, so this is one of my favorite works of art of his, okay? And it's just like you can see that there are no clean, straight lines. The figure itself is not the focus. It's about just looking to this everyday life of this man on the water for inspiration in art, right? Look at the big, heavy brushstrokes. They're heavy and deliberate, and you can see that he's not going necessarily for the image itself. He's trying to evoke an emotion out of you, right? Sorry, it's one of my favorites. And then, of course, you have my wife's favorite impressionist, Cassatt, right? Cassatt and her famous ballerinas, right? Still very similar themes here. Heavy brush strokes, not clean lines. We're not worried about the person themselves. We're worried about the scene and the environment and the emotions that surround it. Cassatt also was a very, very big proponent of including women and like aspects of female life within her artworks, right? This is a mother nursing her child, right? Very, very famous piece of Marie Cassatt, right? So then you've got, of course, Van Gogh, right? Talk about heavy brush strokes. You can like this stuff is layered, right? That, of course, is Starry Night by Van Gogh, right? Trying to like evoke a psychological meaning to try and show in this particular piece the smallness and the daintiness and the absolute fraction of a thing that people matter by comparison to the stars, the world, and the earth of which we live on, right? Because look how small and insignificant this town looks by comparison to the glory of nature, right? And then, of course, you have actually what I believe is a very underrated Van Gogh piece, Sunflowers, all right? So this actually is one of his like famous, he has multiple sunflowers. This one's my favorite one because I believe this one shows the eventuality of death, right? I think, to me anyway, it does. To me, this is not a particular art like theory in a sense, but like the sunflowers are dying. They're withering away, right? So I believe that, and like look at just you can see, if you were to brush your hand over top of this painting, you would feel the lumps of paint. Like, to me, that is just something else because it's not refining and erasing and redacting and like trying to make it look perfect. It's about trying to express his emotions through just almost globs of paint, right? Like, so, and I also love, a lot of people don't like Van Gogh for the picture, like he operates in kind of monochromatic styles a lot, like heavy on the blues and Starry Night, heavy on the yellows, and this is Sunflowers piece. I love it though, because I love the contrast of color and the brightness of the details, right? Like, for example, this molded withering sunflower in contrapposto to all the other ones. Like, and just like, look, like nothing beautiful lasts. That's what I'll leave you on with that one. Nothing beautiful lasts. Now, this also is my wife's very favorite one. This is Gustav Klimt, right? This is the Kiss is the one it's known as. It is heavily decorated with gold leafing and is like very, very trying to evoke an emotional response to this heavily decorated image of love and union between two people, right? And then, of course, you have Picasso and his Cubism phase. Now, if nothing else says that, oh my gosh, World War I freaked us out, I don't know what else will, because that right there screams, to me, right? So, now, let's get weird, shall we? Let's get into the avant-garde phase, all right? The non-representational art. The art that turns away from nature completely. Kandinsky is a very famous one for that, right? Non-representational art was supposed to be an art form that is kind of just, when I say avant-garde movements are things that are trying to inspire shock and awe, as well as being completely fine with turning away from assumed standards of art. It can be anything you want it to be, right? That's where you kind of get a lot of our modern artists today, right? So Kandinsky is a very famous non-representational artist. And then you got Dada. Dada is mental. Dada, I could basically flip a chair over in class, break it, smear a bunch of paint all over the top of it, and then place a textbook on it to try and show the destruction of educational society in the modern era. And then I'm going to give it a stupid name, and I'm going to be like, I'm going to call it whale. All right? So that's Dada. That's a reaction to the absolute shock of World War I. challenges all traditional ideas, delights in the outrageous, wants to show that, like life, art is meaningless. How ironic, right? So, and then you also, of course, have surrealist, which is my favorite. Favorite surrealist is Salvador Dali. Portrays the portrayals of the unconscious, right? A lot of Salvador Dali claims that a lot of his art was actually done from his dreams, right? Worlds of wild dreams and uncomfortable symbols, okay? So, politically, many artists sided with the far left, and they express that in their art. So let's look at some of these pieces, right? This is non-representational art. This is a Kandinsky piece, right? This is just that's all I got. All right, so this is Dada. This is one of the most famous Dada works ever, right? It's an upside-down urinal. Dada. All right, so now this is Dada as well. Dada. Oh, collage art was actually heavily used in Dada as well. And then Dada. Oh, this is actually showing veterans of World War I. If you look closely, you can see he's in a wheelchair, missing a leg, a wounded, scarred face, trembles, right, showing shell shock, all right? And then pointing them away as in saying that we can't accept these people in society anymore. And that actually right there is the man, it's the fixed face, like it's one of the men wearing the masks, right? And then he's missing both legs. And then this, of course, is Salvador Dali, right? So Salvador Dali and his surrealism, right? So this one is called Remembrance of Things Past. I think it's Remembrance of Things Past. Oh, no, it's The Persistence of Memory. I'm an idiot. All right, so view, present. So that is The Persistence of Memory. And it's trying to show, this actually came out right after Einstein's theory of special relativity came out. You know, the train, time is only like conscious to the observer. If things are in motion, then time is different for that person than it is for me, right? So he actually came out with this. He claims that he saw this in a dream, trying to show kind of the wasting away of human beings and how we actually, none of us interact with time in the same sense, right? So that's why you've got the melting clocks, right? Everybody calls this the one with the melty clocks, right? Well, that's not actually how it's meant to be seen. Then you have the scavenger ants right here trying to take over this now closed clock. And now this right here, this mysterious beast that lays upon the ground is actually a human face, all right? So you see the eye and the eyelashes and the eyebrow and the bridge of the nose right there? Yeah, it's believed, Dali, he said himself, is we're all just wasting away with the persistence of time, right? And we, ironically, none of us even see it the same way, right? So Salvador Dali's works, a lot of them too, don't have heavy art interpretations because he never went into full depth when he wanted to explain them. Purposely, I believe. So this right here is the Temptation of St. Anthony, right? So this one's really, really intense. It's meant to try and show, of course, like strength and virility in the horse, and then impurity and lust with this naked female figure on top of the back of this elephant, and then gold and wealth, and these things are coming and on the way to tempting St. Anthony, who can only use this cross to fend off these temptations. And I believe the fact that he's not wearing clothes actually represents the weakness of man, and that he has to use the cross to ward off these temptations, right? Now, and then this one is the birth of the new man, right? So the birth of the new man actually believes, like you see how this is actually, the egg itself is actually a globe. He uses a lot of eggs in a lot of his artwork. So the globe, and it's being birthed out of the United States of America. And a lot of people believe that this is supposed to represent the United States post-World War II, trying to help, because this was actually made after World War II, trying to, like, their new place in the world as, like, the savior and the guardian of the world, right? Which is not something I'm happy happened. All right, so then you've got modern music. And in these last few minutes, while I explain a couple of other things, before I cut this off and whatever, the Rite of Spring. I'm going to play you a little something. And I'll be playing this when you come in on Monday as well. This is one of my favorite post-World War II pieces. This is the Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky, right? Now, this music piece kind of perfectly explains post-World War I life, right? The Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky goes in line with the idea that modern music is meant to express emotional intensity. This particular piece of classical music, which I highly suggest if you want to actually get into classical music at all, which I love to listen to it while I work, this is a great place to start because it's wild. It has no rhythm, necessarily, anyway. It's got no flow. It's all over the place. And it's actually 34 minutes long, and it's set to an opera ballet set of dancers, right? As the piece progresses on, and we'll kind of wrap everything up here because I think the next one is the Consumer Society. Yeah. We'll wrap everything up here. It begins to just build. It builds and builds and builds and brings in all this type of emotional intensity. And the ballet company that is supposed to dance in front of you while this music is playing has really wild, erratic movements and very heavy, like, sexual themes and a lot of very, very intense movement. And ironically enough, the very first time it was debuted, Igor Stravinsky, being Russian, had a Russian ballet troupe with him. The very first time it was debuted in Paris, it almost caused a riot. They said they had to cancel, like, the opera early because people in the crowd were, like, flipping out, right? They were seeing everything happening, and they were, like, standing up in their chairs and throwing things. And at one point, an observer said that he saw a man lean over and was beating out the rhythms on the top of a man's head in front of him who was bald. So Igor Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring, when it comes to classical music, is a very good emblem of just the dramatic shift and change of density and intensity when it comes to art and music during this time period, right? So, wait for it. I'm telling you, it's a great piece. If you ever want to get into it, put it on in the car while you're driving. It's something really awesome to listen to in the background. But you hear what I'm talking about now? It's picking up, right? It's getting extremely intense, very, very aggressive, right? But on that note, I'll leave you guys here. Check it out. I hope you guys have a great day. One more flip for Easter break that'll get into the political instability of Europe, right? And kind of the prelude to World War II. And we're going straight into World War II when we get back. So I know you guys are excited about that. I know Emily O'Donnell specifically told me that she's excited to learn about World War II from the European perspective, which I'm also excited to kind of, like, take you on that little, like, journey. You know what I mean? So I'll see you guys later. Have a great day.